Episode 3. Sarah. Sarah's flight through the basement and into the sewers was fast and uneventful. After the initial difficulty of opening the cellar door, she had expected to run into other obstacles, but found the path downward mercifully clear and well-marked. The basement had a pit built into the old concrete foundation, rusted nubs indicating where a steel grate had once covered the hole. A ladder carved into the wall of the shaft itself indicated the way. She clambered down, the air around her growing warmer and more damp until she reached the bottom. It was pitch black, the dim light of the basement unable to reach this far below the sidewalk. She slung the backpack off her shoulder, opened the smallest of 3 zippered pockets, and pulled out a hand light. Upon feeling her body heat and registering the pattern of her handprint, the light came to life, an erupting sunburst that gave shape to the surrounding void. The walls were slick with condensation. The sounds of thousands of legs, each the size of sewing needles, echoed around her as things skittered out of the sudden glare that invaded their domain. Some absurd part of Sarah imagined the skittering things would later talk of her to their offspring, the horrible daemon or goddess who dared bring a piece of the sun into their pristine dark underworld. The tunnel in which she stood took off in 2 directions, but she could not tell one from the other. Far off to her right, she heard the rushing sound of sewage, probably several tons of it, sludging its way through the sewers and out to Still Lake. Sarah shuddered, hoping the sigils wouldn't bring her any closer to the sewage or lake than she already was. Her hopes were soon dashed, however, as she saw what sigil was drawn on the wall across from her. A square within a square, next to a simple arrow pointing toward the sound of rushing water. For half a second, her hands were pulled towards the backpack's main zipper. It was as if they decided on a course of action without Sarah having any direct say in the matter. She had stolen more than just the abacus and transport pod when she left the Adirak Towers. Since that moment, when she decided it was worth losing her credibility, social circle, and livelihood in one fell act of treason, the urge to use it had grown. At first, the impulse had been like a small itch near the center of her back, something to be mentally noted and ignored in favor of the more important things directly in front of her. Now, alone and in the dark, the impulse grew. It would be a shame to have such a powerful resource and not use it, said a voice that was not the one that she used when thinking to herself. She was on the verge of giving in, of allowing herself to use the last item which she had taken. Then the memory of what happened to her sometime friend and longtime supervisor, Dr. Hope Clarkson, flashed through her mind. The way Clarkson had to be wheeled away on a stretcher, how the thin polyester sheet covering her only served to accent, rather than to hide, the wrongness of her body's new shape. The way the Adiraks, Felix and his monstrous brother Willard, had healed her afterward. She breathed deep through her nose, the smell of the sewer enough to bring her back to the present and break the thing's control. Her hands were her own again. She stood, the muscles in her forearms protesting as she hoisted the backpack onto her shoulders. She could feel the weight of the object within the bag, one of its corners pressing through the fabric and into her lower back like the accusatory finger of a forgotten deity, its presence calling out to be noticed. Sarah hurried down the tunnel, doing her level best to ignore the steadily growing pain. The tunnel's concrete floor soon gave way to a metal grate. The wall on Sarah's right side disappeared, replaced by a yawning chasm. The sound of rushing sewage was overwhelming. Despite her aversion to heights, Sarah's curiosity overcame her fear as she shined the handlight beam down, past the railing. Millions of tons of sewage spilled out of dozens of pipes. Each pipe was so large it could have easily held the entirety of Sarah's apartment with room to spare. The sewage looked and moved like burned cooking grease that had been left out all night. The half-suggested shapes of solid things slid in and out of view as they glorped and glopped along different currents of viscous sewage. Against her judgment, nearly against her own will, Sarah followed one of these objects with her light as, whatever it was, went over the edge of a sewage fall. Her mouth turned dry as she watched it disappear, descending beyond the reach of her handlight's beam. She tore her eyes away, refocusing on the path ahead of her. The metal grating suddenly appeared much more fragile, as if simply looking at it wrong would make it crumble to dust. She put out one cautious foot, then another, eyes bolted to a point somewhere in the middle distance that kept the echoing drop out of her peripheral vision. It was as though her knees had wads of glue in them, each step feeling stiff and watery at the same time. She was nearly halfway across before trouble struck. "Don't move," someone shouted, their voice barely audible over the roar of raw sewage. Sarah felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. White-knuckling the handlight, she turned to face the owner of the voice. A woman stood in front of her. At first, Sarah thought the woman was one of the Atarak goons following her. After a moment's observation, however, she rejected this thought. The woman was too striking. She had to be the dirtiest human Sarah had ever seen. Her hair, what little of it there was, hung in clumped, wet strands off a pale, wrinkly scalp. Deep, grit-filled lines trenched their way across her face. These features, combined with the shapeless, black rags the woman used for clothes, gave her an air of something primal. Half-forgotten bedtime stories of witches and children lost in the wastes filtered their way through Sarah's mind. The woman was speaking, but Sarah hardly noticed. She was too busy watching the woman's hands. They were strong hands, Sarah thought, long-fingered, dexterous, and able to effortlessly hold a gun. The little hole at the end of the weapon, no bigger around than the tip of Sarah's pinky, seemed to yawn larger than the chasm over which they both stood. The woman must have seen that Sarah wasn't listening because the lines around her mouth grew tight with displeasure. Not wanting to be shot, Sarah yelled over the torrential noise of sewage falls. "I can't hear you." "What?" the woman yelled back. "Can't hear you worth shit. Keep going the way you was, I'll be behind you." The woman grinned, her gums and teeth shiny with saliva. "Just be sure and move slow and steady, so you don't fall off." Sarah nodded, careful to keep her face a mask of calm understanding rather than stark terror. She turned around, continuing across the chasm with the woman not far behind. Sarah thought furiously. The woman was obviously not a simple thief. Had she been, Sarah imagined the woman's gun would have done more of the talking. Was this bog witch of a woman the contact Sarah had been looking for? She very well could be. It made a kind of sense. Smell and hygiene aside, who better equipped to meet her down here than someone who looked like they knew their way around? After crossing the chasm, Sarah and the woman entered yet another tunnel. They walked for about 20 or 30 minutes before the sound of sewage falls became little more than a distant, churning roar. The woman guided Sarah through the next several intersections, leading her to a high-ceilinged circular room. Including the one by which they had entered, 4 tunnels led back into the maze of sewers, each with a cardinal direction etched into the concrete above it. Above her, a metal staircase spiraled up along the room's circumference. The ladder by which the staircase was supposed to be reached was not in sight, most likely rusted or torn away from the many flash floods that roared through the old town's sewers. "It's far enough," the woman said once they reached the center of the room. The woman walked around Sarah, keeping the distance between them greater than she could reach. Not that Sarah would have done anything. She was a researcher, not a knuckle duster, and probably stood no chance of overpowering the woman. "If this is a robbery, you should know I have nothing of value," Sarah lied. "Maybe you do, maybe you don't," the woman said, her crooked, toothless smile never leaving her face. "I'll know once you empty out that bag of yours." "Look, I don't have time for this," Sarah retorted, her voice coming out hot with impatience bred of fear. "The people chasing me will kill both of us if they catch up. Shoot me if you have to, but make it quick. It's better than taking too long." The woman paused, pursing her lips in thought. "Ain't it easier and quicker just to give me your bag? I'll even let you keep your shoes and the shirt on your back." The woman cackled. "You can't tell me that whatever's in that knapsack of yours is worth your life, girlie." "Under normal circumstances, I probably wouldn't," Sarah conceded. "But it's all I have. Without it, you've killed me anyway. It'll just take longer, so if it's a choice between one and the other..." Something in the woman's expression changed. Sarah might have imagined it, but she thought she could see the tiniest gleam of admiration on the woman's face. "Who's it you're running from?" the woman asked. "Why do you care?" countered Sarah. "Call it professional curiosity," the woman replied, raising her shoulders in a slight shrug. "I'm running from the Adarak caretakers," Sarah admitted. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Why?" she barked. "What did you do to him?" Sarah hesitated, not sure, but trusting her instincts. She took a gamble. "I stole a few things from them, things they desperately wanted back." "Earlier you said I have nothing of value," the woman said, mocking Sarah's more precise language. "Now you're some big-shot corporate thief. Which is it, girlie?" "What I have is nothing of value to you," Sarah said, maintaining eye contact. "Unless you count a severely shortened lifespan as valuable." The woman's face crinkled as her belly laughter filled the room. "A severely shortened lifespan is all any of us get down here, girlie. You gotta have some kind of plan. Or did you just run into the sewers blind?" "I know where I need to go," Sarah said. "Look, you help me get there safely, and I'll make sure the people I'm working with now compensate you." "You talk real pretty," the woman sneered. "Corporate types always do. Then when it's time to pay up, they conveniently forget anything not written down. You gonna write me up a contract, corporate girlie?" "Oh, so you're an expert on all corporate employees? Run into many of us down here?" Sarah asked, inwardly wincing at her own tone. "Only from this side of my gun," the woman said, her sneer sharp enough to cut old leather. She still didn't fire, however. Sarah took that as a sign to push her luck even further. "If you rob me," Sarah said, voicing calm into her voice, "Adarak caretakers will just track you down instead of me. This whole thing becomes your problem. Help me instead, and you still get paid with the minimum amount of risk to yourself." The woman didn't answer. Sarah pushed even harder. "Please," she said. "I need your help." The woman lowered her gun, heaving a deep sigh. "I'll help you, but if you think about screwing me over when we get to where you're going, just remember who's got the gun." "I'll keep that in mind," Sarah said. She held out her hand. "My name's Sarah." "I'm Jules," the woman replied, taking Sarah's hand. "Where am I taking you, Sarah?" "To the rock pile," Sarah answered. "Well, just hope they don't shoot you as soon as they see you. Folks around the pile ain't known for being welcoming, especially to corporates. This way," Jules said, walking down the room's off-shooting tunnels. That's exactly why I reached out to them. They're one of the few groups in Old Town the corporates don't mess with. Yeah, Jules laughed, 'cause most corporates know what'll happen to them if they go around there, especially alone. I'm sure they'll let you in, though. Sarah ignored Jules's sarcasm, deciding for the first time in her life that silence was the better part of wisdom. She was taking a terrible risk. For all she knew, Jules was a plant for the Adiraks or one of their rivals. When Sarah considered it, however, she had to admit that the risk ran both ways. There would be no way for her contact to be sure of Sarah's identity. Would it make more sense to disguise oneself as some rando? Ultimately, none of this changed the circumstance in which Sarah found herself. To bring up these concerns now would end her and Jules's temporary partnership, putting them right back to where they started, with Sarah at the wrong end of a gun. Jules led Sarah through several tunnels. Each one looked the same as the last, the rush of the distant river of sewage never completely out of earshot. At regular intervals, Sarah would see more sigils carved into the walls, indicating that they were at least heading in the right direction. Much of her earlier fear had evaporated, her body simply too tired to maintain the same level of high alert that she'd had earlier in the evening. Fatigue settled on Sarah like a weighted blanket, the muscles in her legs giving little trembles with each new footfall, the thing in her bag seeming to grow heavier with each step. Soon, it was all she could do not to collapse to her knees. Sarah became so focused on the simple act of walking that she didn't notice Jules had stopped until nearly running into her. "What's the matter?" Sarah asked, fighting to keep the annoyance out of her voice. Jules didn't answer, simply raising a finger to point in front of them. Someone was blocking their path. They wore an all-black hazmat suit, face covered by a mask. Over their eyes was a pair of opaque goggles that glinted a deep red in the reflection of Sarah's hand lamp. The stylized, swooping A of Adirak Incorporated was detailed in white on the left side of the suit's chest. In their hand was a single leather-bound tome. They held it open, ready to be used, the gold lettering of its cover catching the light and refracting it into opalescent colors that danced across the walls. Sarah froze, standing still as if this alone would prevent her from being seen. "Sarah Moore. Please, come with me." The man knew who she was. Sarah took a step back, preparing to run. He spoke then, his voice shaking the walls themselves. Tendrils, large as her torso, erupted from the walls, reaching towards Sarah with the speed of an oncoming freight train. She screamed, collapsing as her legs gave way, the weight of her bag dragging her to the floor. Jules drew her gun and fired. A second light, bright as a naked arc lamp, filled the room too fast for Sarah to properly register. At the same time, a sound like gravel sliding down corrugated metal exploded in her ears. Several metal shards the size of fingernail clippings whizzed through the air, striking the man in the chest. They pierced his hazmat suit, sending out minuscule rivulets of blood that glittered like rubies. The tendrils of concrete froze in place, now nothing more than a group of stalagmites grown at impossible angles. The man collapsed, struggling to breathe, his legs flailing as a thick yellowish foam formed at the corners of his mouth. Jules grabbed Sarah's hand and hauled her to her feet. Not letting go, Jules turned and ran, pulling Sarah behind her as she wove her way through the concrete tendrils. Sarah forgot her fatigue, fleeing down the tunnel right behind her guide. Despite their own running steps sounding like thunder cracks in the confined space, she could hear other, heavier footfalls behind them. "What the hell did you hit him with?" Sarah gasped, no longer caring about stealth. "Flechettes," Jules responded. "Got a toxin in 'em. Paralyzes large muscle groups. Stops the heart and lungs. Real nasty. Now, shut up. Trying to breathe. The tunnel they followed split several times, with Jules picking what looked like a random direction at each intersection. Despite this, the footfalls behind them never quite faded into the distance, always sounding as though more Atarak caretakers were right behind them. "Jules," Sarah said, "we can't lead them to where I'm going. We have to lose them." "I know that," Jules snapped. "I got a plan, but it ain't good." "Just do it, whatever it is." At the next intersection, rather than choosing a direction, Jules stopped. She pulled a foldable knife from somewhere and flicked it open. Its blade was no bigger than Sarah's thumb, but it was razor sharp. Without hesitating, Jules drew it across her palm and squeezed until the blood welled and trickled onto the floor. Sarah watched, too out of breath to comment, but nonetheless shocked at what her companion was doing. "Good enough," Jules said before continuing on down the passage. They came to another room with more tunnels leading out from its 4 axes. In the center was a hole from which the sound of rushing water could be heard. Jules ran to it, holding her injured hand over the drop and letting another small rivulet of blood fall into the depths. "What is this place?" Sarah asked, eyeing the apparently pointless hole in the ground. "Flood room," Jules replied, pulling a stained piece of cloth from somewhere and wrapping her hand tight enough to stem the flow of blood. "When the rain gets bad, this room fills with extra water. This hole leads directly to the lake." "What now?" Sarah asked. "Now we hide. Leave your hand light next to this here hole. Hopefully when those Atarak bastards follow us in here, they'll find more than they was hoping for." Jules led Sarah to a rectangular recess in the wall she hadn't noticed. Within that recess was a red door with faded black lettering. "Ancient X Kli," it said. Jules pushed the door's latch, applying constant, careful pressure so as to not make more noise than necessary. They ducked inside. It was some sort of old maintenance closet. Dozens of small pipes lined the wall like veins. Some trembled rhythmically, as though moving to the beat of a titanic heart. They closed the door most of the way, leaving only the barest sliver through which to see the larger room. Within moments, 4 caretakers entered, all dressed the same as the ones Jules had killed earlier. 3 held guns, rifles that looked like they belonged in a B-tier action flick. The 4th, however, had yet another tome. They slowed as they approached the still shining handlight. "Come on," Jules muttered under her breath. "Come on, where are you?" As if on cue, something unseen knocked into the handlight. Shadows focused and concentrated on the far side of the room as caretakers aimed their respective weapons at the things emerging from the hole. Sarah saw shapes. That was all her brain registered. Lumpy sacks that sagged under their own bulbous mass, strands of thick tentacles and thin, chitinous arms that ended in horribly human-looking hands. Hair or bristles jutted out of the shapes, reminding Sarah of the cilia used by microscopic organisms for movement and hunting. They bubbled out of the hole like water from an overboiling pot, translucent and nearly invisible in the dim light. The caretakers screamed. The one with the tome reacted first. A gout of flame erupted within one of the creatures, boiling it from the inside out. Thick, foul-smelling liquid burst from it like pus from a cyst. Seeing this, the other caretakers trained their weapons on the hole and began firing. As the creatures were punctured, their forms burst or deflated, their bodies going limp and shriveling like leaking balloons as ichor drained through the bullet holes. "The fuck are those things?" Sarah whispered, using the noise of the conflict to cover her own voice. "We call them amoebas," Jules responded. "No idea what they are, animal or bug or whatever. Got nothing in them. Just fluid, jelly, and some such. They eat anything in their way. Sarah watched in nauseated fascination. For a moment, it seemed as though the caretaker's weapons and disruptions would be enough to push back the tide of Mebas. They didn't seem to like fire too much. Then, a shuffling, chittering roar erupted from within the hole. "Get ready," Jules said. "We're gonna run." "What? Why?" Sarah asked, eyes wide. "That was their hunting call," Jules explained, not quite keeping the shake of fear from her voice. "It lets the others know where their prey is. What you've seen so far is just their ramping up. They're gonna charge. When they do, we gotta hoof it through that tunnel to our left. When we reach the ladder, climb. Climb for your life." Sarah stared in disbelief, processing what she'd just heard. She opened her mouth, ready to object, when a shrieking howl erupted from the hole. It resonated, echoing up and down the room and inside of their skulls. The sound of primal nightmare, a closed fist slamming on the brainstem's flight button. "Fucking run!" Jules yelled, throwing the door open wide. Two of the caretakers turned, aiming their weapons at the woman. They were immediately grabbed by the rushing Mebas, pale gelatinous tentacles wrapping around their necks and pulling them into the mass of nearly see-through monstrosities. They were there, and then they were nothing more than a fading red stain on the surface of a frothing liquid, bodies and gear alike absorbed for nutrients. This sight had the effect of a whip crack over Sarah's head. She turned and fled as the sounds of the chittering madness, accented by the deadly percussive thundercracks of gunfire, followed them into the tunnel. Some instinct from primal antiquity told Sarah to find another dark, quiet place and hide. Hide like those rodent creatures that used to scurry underground in the age of dinosaurs. She wanted to let the monsters pass her by. She knew it was too late for that, however, and that at this point speed was all that would keep her alive. She ran until the muscles in her legs and sides cramped, until her breath was a shallow stream of hot sand rasping in her chest, until her stomach started to heave and her head started to pound. Sarah leaned to the side, nearly falling over as she retched, a stream of hot vomit and bile spraying the floor and walls. Jules grabbed her and pulled mercilessly, forcing her to keep going. Oddly enough, running became easier after she puked. Behind them, the sound of gunfire stopped. Sarah slowed to listen, almost hoping that the caretakers had survived. All she could hear, however, was continued chittering. It grew louder as the Mebas, still in a frenzy, propelled themselves after her and Jules. The sound of their jelly-like bodies sliding over concrete reminded Sarah of a video she had seen once on a tidal wave rushing over land. The way the buildings had seemed to melt flashed in her mind, overlaid with the two caretakers that had dissolved into the writhing mass. "Hey!" Jules yelled, waving her injured hand in front of Sarah's face. "They're hunting me by smell. Our only hope is to reach the ladder. Keep running, don't stop no matter what happens." Sarah didn't have enough breath left to answer. She stumbled on, willing herself not to stop out of sheer stubbornness. How far away was this ladder? 100 feet? 1,000? Half a mile? The adrenaline that had pushed her so far had nearly run its course. She had nothing left to give but the raw, unfiltered desire to survive this nightmare. Through the reek of sewer and the taste of her own vomit, through the blind terror and leaden fatigue, Sarah's desire to live became a prayer older than mankind itself, older than life itself. The thing inside her bag felt her desire, heard her wordless prayer, and tuned itself like an antenna. Somewhere else, in the darkness of a direction no living thing could name, something woke up. Something heard Sarah. Unfortunately for everyone, something decided to answer. You have been listening to Dead Arcology, written and recorded by me, Michael K. Ostis. If you enjoyed this story, please consider sharing it. I have episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Podbean, as well as several others. Updates, schedules, and news can be found on the website, deadarcology.com, as well as on the social media apps Blue Sky and Instagram under the username Dead Arcology. If you want to help Dead Arcology grow more directly, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/deadarcology. Thank you again for listening. It really helps a lot. I very much appreciate you giving this story your time, and I will see you in about 2 weeks. Goodbye.